Eupraxia is a clinical stage biotechnology company with a strong balance sheet that has developed a platform technology to provide locally delivered extended release therapeutics. I've been trying to get Eupraxia on for several years now, and I think now is an excellent time as 2025 has lots of expected milestones and catalysts that could provide a very meaningful re-rating of the stock. I'm Martin Gago with Market Radius Research. It's Wednesday, January the 8th. Please remember, this is neither recommendation nor investment advice. James, thank you for joining us. It's great you could squeeze us in ahead of JP Morgan Healthcare Conference next week. It's nice to be in such good company. Happy New Year, and please tell us what's going on at Eupraxia.
Absolutely, Martin. Thank you very much. And thank you to all for joining this afternoon, and Happy New Year to you all. Really appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here and tell you a bit about Eupraxia. As we do that, a little bit of forward-looking statements and also give you a little bit of background on myself. So founded this company in 2012, leaving my position as a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist. So where focus there was on heart transplants, artificial heart work, and also the critical care management of those patients. So why is that relevant to what we're doing here? So at Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals, what this is all about is trying to replicate the precision of delivery that I had with drugs in the operating room and in the critical care environment, and being able to do that for all patients, meaning outpatients. So people like you and me who are not in the hospital, being able to ensure that we're delivering the right dose of the drug to the right place for the right amount of time. And why does that really matter? Because drugs actually, even though they target the right receptors, they might not deliver exactly the way we want or where we want. That means you get less efficacy and more side effects. So how do we do that? Well, what we've created are what you see in front of you. And these are really a little engineering marvel. My chief scientific officer, Dr. Amanda Malone, who did her PhD at Stanford in biomedical engineering, took the vision and was able to create these microspheres. So what are these? These are drug on the inside and only drug on the inside, built in a special crystal form that we create, surrounded by a balloon, and that balloon remains intact in size and shape. And we put those balloons where we want them. Here you can see a picture of an esophagus. We're going to talk about that in a moment, but these actually get injected into the wall of the esophagus, or in the case of other applications, could be into the knee and osteoarthritis, or into a tumor to eat the tumor from the inside without the medication, the chemotherapy going everywhere in the body. That's exactly how this works here. And so it works by diffusion. So in other words, it's like these little balloons or pumps delivering over a long period of time the drug exactly where you want it. Here, what you can see is what this drug actually looks like. This is from our 312 patient trial, which was our first pivotal trial in osteoarthritis. From a single injection given at day 1, you can see here a steady delivery of drug over a 6-month period of time with no big burst at the beginning. So maximizing efficacy, minimizing side effects, getting the drug right where we want. As Martin pointed out, 2025 is going to be a really exciting year for Eupraxia. A lot of things are culminating using our Diffusphere technology that we just showed you there, and looking at the multiple markets that we are in, as well as expanding the places where we are. In our study, which we're about to talk about in a bit of a mouthful of a disease called eosinophilic esophagitis, which I'll explain in a moment, we're going to be seeing lots of data. At least every quarter, there is going to be meaningful advancing data in that program. And we're also looking forward to being able to talk about business development opportunities, partnerships, and expansion of what we are doing. So let's dive a little bit into the diseases where we are and why we think we're making a very big difference there for patients and why those markets are big opportunities. So eosinophilic esophagitis, boy, it's a mouthful of a disease. It's also a fairly new disease. So if you haven't heard of it, don't worry about that. When I went through medical school, it was not a disease. It has been discovered to essentially be like asthma, but of the esophagus. So in other words, it's an inflammatory condition, kind of unknown origin, But as they're looking for it, what they're discovering is that for years, we've had people who've complained of difficulty in swallowing, which can mean it's hard to get food down, or pain on swallowing. Now, a lot of those people have been told just to chew more slowly or told that they maybe have reflux. In fact, as they go through and look at this and they biopsy the tissue, what they find is these people actually have these inflammatory cells called eosinophils. They're part of an allergic reaction. And so as this progresses, it actually makes your esophagus smaller and smaller because of the inflammation, fills it with scar tissue. You have the potential for cancer if that is allowed to progress too long. And these patients essentially gets worse and worse. So it's a lifelong disease. The really unfortunate thing is there really hasn't been a lot in the way of treatment. Again, this disease is growing very, very rapidly. So this was an orphan disease just several years ago with fewer than 200,000 people in the US who had it. The most recent data is saying that there's between 5 and 700,000 patients in the US, with predictions that it's actually well north of 1 million and probably closer to 2, because we're actually going looking for it now. So people with this disease has very disrupted lives. It means that they often can't enjoy food with family, food with friends. Eating is very difficult. So what do they do for treatment today? So today, the number one thing, which is off-label, is to use steroids. And they use steroids. In fact, the one that we are going to be talking about today that we have in our Diffusphere technology called fluticasone propionate. You may know it as Flovent or Flonase. So traditionally inhaled. People have been taking that swallowed. The problem is that although it paints the surface of the esophagus, it doesn't get deep into the tissues. It actually works quite well despite that bad delivery. But the problem is most people get a side effect of actually getting a fungal infection in their mouth and down through their esophagus. So really awful side effects. And about 70% of people just stop taking the drug because of that. The one approved chronic medication is Dupixent. So it is a monoclonal antibody that you inject yourself subcutaneously once a week. Patients often describe this as a bit of a painful injection, and particularly with pediatric and adolescent patients, find it very uncomfortable and can create a lot of trauma for them. So,
James,
yes.
sorry. So the patient has a needle and injects themselves in the throat area?
No, so they actually inject themselves anywhere in their body. So this is
Oh,
again
okay.
a matter of a drug being delivered to every cell in the body where what you're trying to target is the esophagus.
Okay.
Um, this injection is also once a week. It costs about $100,000 a year. And in their published studies, they report that only 13% of their patients treated with this got both a histologic treatment, in other words, on biopsy, as well as felt better. So that got full remission, as we call it. So our goal here is what we do is actually take our little balloons that we talked about earlier. And these patients need to go every year for what's called an endoscopic exam. So that means that you go in, you get some sedation, and your gastroenterologist actually puts a camera down your esophagus to take pictures and biopsies to monitor to the disease. So you're already there for a procedure. Then what they do, and they're very experienced at doing this, is they actually inject our drug into the esophagus. So it actually gets deep into the tissues. Now, fortunately for us as humans, we actually don't have pain receptors for sharp pain in the esophagus. In other words, you can't feel any of those injections and they don't cause discomfort afterwards. The study that we're doing right now, called the Resolve trial, is a dose escalation. So in other words, we're adding more and more both coverage of the esophagus as well as dose within each injection site. I'm going to show you some data here. Bear in mind that this data is only covering half of the esophagus so far. So we are only covering half the disease when you look at the results that we're going to be seeing here. And so the things that are really important to note here are what you want to see is an improvement in how patient feels. You want to see a reduction in their eosinophil counts, so those inflammatory cells. And you also want to see on biopsy that the health of the esophagus, done by a score called the EOEHSS, is improving. Now, I know a lot of you have probably heard, oh, an injection in the esophagus doesn't sound very nice. We've actually been and talked to the patients. There's a huge patient group, and they meet every year at this AppFed conference. We took the opportunity to go and talk to these patients and actually find out how they felt about an injection during their routine exam versus having to take a once weekly injection or off-label oral steroids. 100% of patients much preferred the idea of during this exam that they were already getting, simply getting their drugs and not having to worry about their treatment the rest of the time. So very strong feedback from physicians, from patients, that this is a treatment modality that they would prefer, that they want, and they are looking forward to. So now let's see where we are in terms of the data. Now remember, we're only halfway through the dose escalation here. So first, let's look at how patients are feeling. Here you're seeing 3 cohorts. Cohort 3, which is the green there, we're only covering about a third of the esophagus. At 4 and 5, we're covering half of the esophagus.
James, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. When you say covering, it's just like half of the length or one side of it. If it was covered full, the doctor would put some more injections or a higher dose, or
Yeah,
what do you mean by that?
absolutely. So great question. So really what we're talking about is if you think about the esophagus, it's about the size of a ruler that we all used to have in school that's 30 centimeters. What we're talking about is only covering the first 15 centimeters. Because what we're doing as we're going up in cohorts is we're adding more injections, covering more of the esophagus. And it's part of showing the FDA why you need the number of injections that you need, and that you're giving people what they need, but not more than they need. And so as we go up here, you're essentially leaving a lot of the esophagus without your drug yet. Despite that, a score here of -3, which you see on the left-hand side of where those numbers are, is considered full clinical remission by the definition of this index. And so when you look at that, 100% of our patients in cohorts 4 and 5 achieve through their treatment period full clinical remission. Now, that's really important because what you want to see is patients feeling better, as well as patients seeing histologic improvement. That histologic improvement is really important, and we are seeing an absolute correlation between how much coverage and dose we give and the response that we are seeing. This is really important as you look at cohorts 3, 4, and 5, both in the extent of the disease, so the stage, as well as the grade or the severity of the disease. You're seeing the improvement here of sort of going from 15% to 40% to 54% as we go. So that means that we are starting to see what is framing up to be a best-in-class result in terms of the sort of objective biopsy results. So again, there's nothing subjective about this, and also in how patients feel. And I talked about 3 measures that were really important. I just showed you 2 of them, and the response in those 2 is really encouraging to us. And also the key opinion leaders, the world leader in this disease, Evan Dellin, is the chair of our clinical advisory board, has been advising this trial design and its ongoing prosecution here. In addition to the fact that we're seeing these 2 results, we are also seeing a reduction in that eosinophil count. And that's really important. You can see again that dose response. The more we give, the better response. So we expect as we advance in the cohorts, what we're going to see is more response as well as longer duration. And one of the really key features here is not only is this drug working, as we're just walked through that evidence, it is also safe. We have not seen any drug-related adverse effects throughout this trial. So we talked earlier about people getting fungal infections from steroids. We have not seen a single patient with that side effect, nor with any other side effects, other than a little bit of a sore throat, which is related to the scope that they are already doing, not to our procedure or delivery of our drug. What you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen is we're not making any difference to people with blood sugar. which is very common as a side effect with steroids. And also the body's natural steroid cortisol is unaffected, just as we saw in our osteoarthritis trial. So again, we are delivering the right dose of the drug to the right place, which is the esophagus, in a very targeted and precise fashion, and doing so over a long period of time with great safety. What does this mean for the development path forward? Well, there are hundreds of thousands, if not sort of more than 1 million patients who are waiting for something that is safe, effective, convenient, and cost-effective. And we are marching very quickly to providing data demonstrating that we are going to be seeing a lot of value-creating milestones. So looking forward to 2025, what you can see here is that we are going to continue to have readouts every 3 months. So we are going to be seeing in the first quarter more data. We're going to see early in the second quarter even more data. What is this data going to be showing us? It's going to be showing us, as we move up, that data that we just showed you, that's going to become more dense, larger in numbers. And also we hope and expect to see improvement in each of those metrics, really making us first in class and best in class, and ideally being the first line therapy for this disease. We will continue this escalation. And then about the middle part of 25, we're going to move to a randomized controlled trial. So that means it's going to be placebo versus active. And that is going to turn this into what we expect to be our first pivotal trial, meaning that at the early part of 26, when we have wrapped all of that up and got that data, we will be able to go to the FDA and simply have one more phase 3 trial, which will be the one trial needed for commercialization. And again, relatively small in size based on the effects that we're seeing, and the sort of the statistics that we will require is really probably around the 200 patient mark. It'll be somewhere between 150 and 300. But we expect it to be closer to the 200 mark, meaning that it's a fairly small trial to execute, which means it's time and cost efficient to be able to get us onto the market. So we're incredibly excited about EOE. We have a lot of interest from strategic partners or potential partners around the world interested in this disease, and also the physicians and the patients who have this disease. As our data has been presented, we presented at 3 GI conferences or gastroenterology conferences in 2024, received awards for our data at each one of those conferences, and got a lot of very positive feedback. So we expect through 25 for that momentum to continue, which will be really good for shareholders as opportunities really develop for us to showcase where we're going in this disease. So beyond,
James, sorry,
yes.
just since we're on that, with the data that's coming out, is that going to be you're escalating the dose? So that's going to be the results from a higher dose and a higher coverage, and then you can see if like, and presumably at some point they're diminishing returns. You keep escalating it, and then the curve kind of flattens out a bit. So we're going to be watching for how long it keeps going up, and then when it flattens out.
That's right. And we expect that flattening to occur. So I just showed the first 5 cohorts. Cohort 6 has been dosed. That data is coming imminently. Cohort 7, that data will be coming in the early part of Q2. And we expect that's probably about as far as we're going to go on escalation based on the data that we're seeing, if that continues. So that's a very exciting point and a real catalyst for investors, because it now means you're moving into that first part of that registration process, and that you've got the validity and the quality of the data that you want to see. And again, really supported by the top key opinion leaders around the world who are really making that call, looking at this data in real time. Let's pivot a little bit to osteoarthritis. And I won't spend a lot of time here because I want to leave some time for some questions. So osteoarthritis is a very large problem. When we look at this, there are roughly 18 million people in the United States who are suffering from doctor-diagnosed osteoarthritis of the knee. So this is a lot of people. Of those, at the very tail end, you can get your joint replaced. However, everybody who sits in the middle, which is roughly 12 million people who have daily pain, don't actually have a safe and effective daily therapy. So non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, your ibuprofen, your Celebrex, things like that, have been demonstrated to have significant downstream side effects with chronic use. So those include heart attacks and strokes. 40% of all the heart attacks and strokes that occur in osteoarthritis patients are directly related to the chronic use that they have of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. For diabetics, those risks get magnified, yet diabetics are about 30% of this population. Injectable steroids, which have been used for 50 years into the joint, the problem is that they affect your blood sugar, they can damage your cartilage locally, and they can also lower your body's cortisol. So that's your body's natural steroid. What we have demonstrated with our Springboard trial, which was our first pivotal trial, that just got published in the Lancet just a couple of months ago. So really the top journal in the world, which doesn't normally publish a lot of osteoarthritis literature, published this. And why? Because of what we saw in this trial was efficacy combined with safety. And so as we look at that, it's all about that precise localized delivery into the joint from a very simple 15-second injection delivered by the doctor, not uncomfortable, sort of no freezing or anything required, very, very quick, absolutely fits the business model of the way orthopedic surgeons work, as well as the needs of the patient. What we saw there was statistical significance to 22 weeks, looking at actually taking people and making them essentially pain-free so that they could wake up each morning and go to bed each night without pain and in the intervening period. So this is really important. And this really gives some of the longest, in fact, the longest when we look at this OMRAC-Dorsey strict responder, which is the highest bar to get over. So you're essentially getting 6 months from a single injection. And we also looked at the diabetic patients in this population. So we recruited diabetics and compared them to getting our drug or getting a placebo, and there was no difference in blood sugar. That's incredibly important because what it means is for the 30% of those 18 million people who have diabetes and osteoarthritis that don't have a safe alternative today, we look to be able to provide a safe and perhaps even first-line alternative for those patients to be able to allow them to get relief from their pain, be able to get back to moving and exercising, which helps control their diabetes, as well as looks after their osteoarthritis. This data we took to an end of phase 2 meeting at the FDA in 2024. At that, we really had a discussion and confirmation from the FDA that we're going to require just one more trial. And it is essentially a rinse and repeat of the trial I just showed you. We just need to show a few more patients for the safety database. And that's really important because it means that the risk involved in that trial is de minimis because it's the same trial done again, looking at the same outcome measures in the same group of patients, except for we get to recruit diabetics now, just like everybody else, with no special monitoring, which means that when we look at the label, it means that diabetics, we anticipate being on the label, which may allow us, again, to really be the first-line treatment for that very large patient population. In terms of what we're doing with this asset, while we may be running phase 3, we are not a commercial company. We're talking to lots of interested parties about essentially handing this off for the commercial launch of this product. And we, again, look at that as an important catalyst for investors throughout the 2025 period.
James, sorry, just going back to that with the diabetic patients, because it's a steroid that's encapsulated, am I right with that? And normally that would cause blood sugar and related diseases. So in your first trial, you weren't covering, or you've done a few diabetic OA patients with diabetes, and then in the final pivotal, it would include sort of the statistical average of whatever diabetics with OA and that in it. Is that right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So steroids traditionally have a label warning on them for diabetics that says, look, this may be unsafe because it can disrupt your blood sugar. And really what it does is make your blood sugar go up, which means your insulin requirements change. And that can be very dangerous for people who are balancing their diabetes. And so what we demonstrated in this trial is that we had no impact on blood sugar because we're in the joint and only really in the joint. And
Yeah.
so because of that, it really means that as we look at this last trial, we can take diabetics in, knowing that they're safe and we don't need to do anything special for them. And that then translates through onto the label.
I would think and I'm not a doctor or anything, and I don't know if I'm way off base here. The Venn diagram of diabetics and OA patients, there's a lot of overlap in there. Would that be a fair guess?
It is absolutely is a fair guess. So in osteoarthritis patients, 30% of them have diabetes. So it is a really big number. You're really talking about, sort of 6 million people who are both diabetic um, and have osteoarthritis of the knee. Then when you start to talk about other joints such as shoulder and hip and other places, that Venn diagram continues or maybe even crosses over even more.
Okay,
So
thank you.
it's a critical feature of the value proposition that we bring that's strongly differentiated from other options on the market today. When we look, we talked a lot about this great data that we're seeing in these two indications and why these products we believe are going to be very valuable and why I believe they're going to be rewarding for investors as we roll through 25 and into 26, delivering all of this data in the near term and the moderate term. As we look even further out, there's much more opportunity that we can layer in here. You can imagine when we talk about cancer, the goal with cancer therapy is to attack the tumor and not attack the healthy cells. We believe that with our technology and what we've demonstrated in EOE and in OA, that we have the ability to take chemotherapeutic agents to actually put them directly into a tumor and only into a tumor so that you're not having all the off-target effects. You're only having the effect on the tumor cells itself. So we look forward to being able to explore this and many other opportunities throughout 25, again, providing real catalysts for investors. As you mentioned at the beginning, we're very pleased right now with our financial position. So we look right now, we have a market cap of just over $100 million on the NASDAQ. As you can see, we have a lot of board and management ownership, which is really through participation. Every member of management and board, including myself, have participated in virtually every round that has happened in the company with people's involvement. So people have skin in the game here and have strong belief in the programs that we're doing and the value that we're going to bring to investors. In terms of cash on hand, we have, after a private placement that occurred on November the 1st, we have roughly $41 million US dollars, which takes us through to Q3 of 2026, which allows us to deliver all the catalysts that we talked about today. We have cash in treasury to deliver that, and have quite a bit of time to be able to deliver some more as well. So really find ourselves in a very good opportunity for investors to be able to sort of see and know that we have the cash to deliver all the things that we've just talked about. So with that, maybe I'll take the opportunity, Martin, to hand it over and see if there are any questions that may be able to answer.
James, thank you very much. One of the things that I really like about Eupraxia is to me it seems like it's it's a platform technology where you've got your Diffusphere technology and then you put other drugs into it. So the Diffusphere is sort of a proven, and then you have to try it for the different agents that are within it. So, and I don't think you quite said this, or maybe I missed it. The drugs, the agents that you're using in your OE, did I get EOE and your OA trials, those are existing drugs that are already used. You're just putting them in to your technology. Can you clarify what the actual active component is in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So in those first two assets, what we're using is a drug called fluticasone propionate. So you may know it as Flovent, Flonase. So it's an existing steroid, been around a very long time. Quite literally, millions of patients take it every single day. And so what we've been able to do is we're the first to turn it into an injectable. And we do so augmenting its efficacy, its precision, and its safety, and by putting it within the Diffusphere. In that process, and we've done lots of work with other drugs we haven't talked about today. We've worked with local anesthetics, we've worked with anti-infectives, we've done with some very early work with chemotherapeutic agents. And so we know that we can work with both existing drugs. We also have the ability to help solve, for example, big pharma's delivery problems with a drug that they may have that's new, but they're having difficulty delivering it properly. We have with Diffusphere the option to be able to engage in conversations, to be able to actually help them solve those problems and own then part of that asset. So it gives us a lot of opportunity to both generate our own products as well as to work with others.
Would I be stepping out of line here if, let's say, some oncology or cancer drugs are highly toxic and they're maybe for broad distribution within the body, too hard on the body, but maybe a drug company has a very toxic but effective cancer drug, and if they could do it in a more localized way, all of a sudden maybe a shelved drug could now be brought back in because it could be delivered in an effective, very specific manner that you do. Would that
Yeah,
be fair?
you're not out of line at all. In fact, you're right in line with the way that we think about this. So you may have heard about radiopharmaceuticals or antibody drug conjugates. Why do they exist? Their purpose is to try and deliver the toxicity only to the tumor and not to the rest of the body, yet they're still systemically delivered. What we are doing is delivering precision almost very mechanically. So we can take absolutely a very toxic chemotherapeutic agent, which you want toxicity because you're trying to kill those tumor cells. What you don't want it is off target. So just as we injected the esophagus and the drug works there and stays there, just as we did it in the knee, we've done injections in the eye, we've done them in the back and around the spinal cord, we've done injections around the brain. So we know we can deliver with great precision using our Diffusphere. So to be able to combine a highly toxic chemotherapeutic agent to kill the tumor and to put it in our Diffusphere inside the tumor directly via a needle, which is actually quite easy to do, that basically what that means is you're not going to have all those off-target toxicities effects. You would only have them in the tumor. And so we anticipate and look forward to really being able to launch into programs like that off the back of the success that we're having in osteoarthritis, in EOE, and in other areas that we look forward to as well. So we look forward to a really exciting 2025 and delivering a lot of value.
As everyone knows, going through the whole FDA process for good safety reasons and efficacy reasons, it takes a long time. When you go to the FDA and say, hey, we've got this technology, we're wanting to use it with a well-known agent, do they have good protocols on, okay, we know how to handle this, and how does it speed it up, and how does it change the way they assess and review the drug and its permissions to move forward?
And so there's sort of two dimensions that we get to take advantage of there. One of them is because we're using an existing drug, we get to follow a pathway called the 505(b)(2). So it's an abbreviated pathway that lets us not have to redo what others who've used that drug in the past have done. We really just need to demonstrate in our application why this is safe. So we get to move a lot more rapidly and with a lot less expense into clinical trials. The second part is the more we are using our Diffusphere technology, the faster we can iterate. So in other words, in osteoarthritis, it took us about 8 years to get into our first pivotal trial. In EOE, it took us about a year. And so
are those two drugs identical, what you're injecting into the esophagus and the knee? There's no change in it. It's this exact same thing.
It is the exact same drug in the Diffusphere.
Yeah.
It is a different product because it has to be manufactured in a different vehicle because they need to be carried differently to those two different locations. So they're priced differently. They can't crosstalk because of that.
You couldn't take the EOE and put it in your knee. That wouldn't work.
Exactly. And same vice versa. So but we get the advantage of being able to move very quickly because the regulators have seen the Diffusphere, all of the data we have on it. They've seen it with that drug, and they've seen it with other drugs as well. And so as we move forward, it allows us to move fairly quickly. And that's a real advantage for investors because it allows us to generate good clinical data, in a much more cost and time effective manner.
I presume you could do this both with a generic drug where it's off patent and as well with an on patent or someone owns the technology, but you'd have to do it in the structure of a licensing agreement. Is that potentially, is that available as well?
So absolutely. So for example, if there is a pharma company out there that has a product and their product is struggling because of delivery, in other words, they just can't get the precision, they can't get the delivery that they want. So it may be that they get a burst at the beginning that's too toxic. We would absolutely have the ability to do an agreement with them, or we would say, look, we will manufacture this for you. We will solve this delivery problem for you in exchange for, a piece of that drug, and it's with milestones and revenue going forward. So very sort of low risk for the investor because we're tackling someone else's drug on their dime, but getting the long-term sort of payback from that, in addition to the products that we are continuing to generate.
And would you expect that to be where they kind of license their technology to you and then you do the encapsulation part of it, or you license it to them and then they do the trials and the delivery, or more of a sort of real joint venture where they've got their drug expertise, you've got your delivery expertise, and you work on it in that way?
We view it more as a co-development, so a joint venture opportunity, where we do the manufacturing, we're the experts in that, and we're not about to teach others how to do that, but they would remain the experts in their drug.
You mentioned this already, but just to clarify, developing a drug is very expensive, but launching it is very expensive as
Yeah.
well. And I believe you said one of the drugs you would license that out potentially to let someone else roll it out and take on the sales and marketing and not take on that burden. What's your like a specific strategy, or do you have them for the different drugs? And then is there a general corporate strategy once you get a few under your belt, then you'll roll them out yourselves, or how do you envision that happening in
Yeah.
the future?
So I think it's really on a case by case basis. And at the end of the day, we do an analysis that says what is best for the shareholder, what is lowest risk and best return. So let's look at our two assets that we have right now. In osteoarthritis, for example, it's a fairly heavy commercial lift. You're going to need a sales team of 150 people to be able to cover, for example, the United States. For investors would not want us without the commercial expertise to, as a first commercial launch into a market like that with 150 salespeople. There are people who have those sales forces, they're calling on those doctors, and they make it a perfect, they're looking for products and we're looking to put it into someone's hands. So they're doing a deal, and that deal can look a lot of different ways. And we just look for what's advantageous to the shareholder, where we can ensure that that product is getting the maximum sales and exposure that it can get, and we're seeing the maximum revenue that we can get for a deal. Now, eosinophilic esophagitis is a bit of a different story. It's a highly specialized group of physicians. There is not a lot of competitive sort of folks in the landscape. And if we are the first line therapy, it may well be you have a sales force of 30 people. That is a launch that then becomes very manageable in the United States. However, when we look throughout the world, we do not ever look at launching a product outside the US. There are experts within each of those jurisdictions. And so we certainly look to partnerships there. If we have assets, and we never commercialize anything, it's always done by other people. It'll be because that's the right choice for the shareholders. And we continue to put our resources into what right now we do best, which is generate products and ideas, such as the ones we've talked about today, as well as future ones in oncology.
Can you just give us a quick rundown or a quick synopsis of the catalyst that you expect to be coming up over the next 6 to 9 months? What kind of news should investors expect to be hearing?
Yeah. So I think the underpinning steady flow there is going to be continued clinical data from the EOE program. And that data is becoming more meaningful with each release because it's more patients, it's longer term data, and it's sort of higher dose, more coverage. And so what they're going to see is in the very near term. So in Q1, we will have some data from some of the cohorts that we haven't released yet. And then at the early part of Q2, what people will see is a much bigger bolus of data that's going to be tracking 9 months for some patients, 6 for others, and 3 for others. So really getting this long-term view of how we're seeing the efficacy and the safety and the duration all coming together. That's a really important data point that a lot of institutional investors, a lot of strategics are really looking forward to. As we roll into Q3, you're going to see continued data as well as the launch of the randomized control portion of the trial. So that's a very important sort of landmark and time point. So again, a real driving catalyst for value there. And that data will continue to report throughout the remainder of 2025, at least once a quarter. So fairly steady news flow. It's always very difficult for us to anticipate business development transactions, but based on the data that we have, the conversations that we're having, we would expect through 2025 that there may be some announcement there if they are right for shareholders or if we're going to continue to move forward with some of these programs ourselves. So those are the sorts of things that people can look for. And the other thing is looking to us for an announcement sometime through 25 about the other products that we're going to bring on board, how we're going to do that, and the kind of value people can expect from that and when they can expect to see really meaningful data. So we think 25 is going to be very busy with a lot of those clinical catalysts, non-clinical catalysts, regulatory interactions as well. And then that will continue on into 2026. So we think that there's, with our valuation where it is today, with the cash that we have on hand, there's a very good opportunity, we believe, for investors. And so really appreciate the opportunity to be able to tell the story today. And so thank you for that.
James, excellent. I think we covered a lot of territory there. I think you did your final wrap-up comments, but any sort of final closing statements to put a bow on this before we call it a day here?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think that has appealed to a lot of our investors is that this is really fairly low risk. If you like biotech and you want to be able to get into large markets where you're making a difference, we're dealing with existing drugs. We know how they work. We can see that they're working already in this clinical data. And so the regulatory risk, the clinical risk is really sort of low for the biotech world. And so we believe that that combined with the catalysts really makes this an enticing opportunity. And we mostly are really thrilled with the impact that we're having on patients' lives, and the feedback that we're getting from patients who are in the trial is really wonderful. And we look forward to the opportunity to continue to do that.
Excellent. James, thank you. That was a compelling story you've got, fascinating technology, and hopefully you can get a lot of people healthier and feeling better. So thank you very much. It was great. Good luck at the JP Morgan conference, and I look forward to chatting with you again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, everybody, for your time and attention.